Hello, welcome. This is a webinar for the Scouting at Home series. And this webinar is about adult volunteer mental health. So thinking about how we can look after our mental health as a volunteer, and also as organisations supporting volunteers. My name's Jay. I'm a mental health nurse, and I'm also training to be a CBT therapist. And I'm also a scout that talks a lot about mental health. So I hope you enjoy the webinar, and we'll begin shortly. Okay, hello everybody. Thank you very much for giving up an hour of your time to come and talk about mental health, and specifically the mental health of volunteers as well. Got people all over the world joining us today, and it'd be really nice to just see any comments that you have in the chat bar. If you haven't done so already, maybe just say hello on there and explain where you're from. That'd be really nice to see. Couple of technical things. I'd recommend you put your mic on mute unless you want to speak. You can't monitor all the cameras at the same time because the PowerPoint's on, so maybe just wave at us if you can, or drop a message to say you'd like to say something. There is also a raise the hand button as well. The way the session's going to work today is that we're going to do I'm going to do a presentation to start with, and what we'll then do is open it up to breakout rooms so that we can have small discussions for around 3 people in each group. And the idea of this is to get you talking and to get sharing ideas for what you can do to either your own or your fellow scouts' mental health, or what you can do as an organisation to support volunteer mental health. Before we begin, I just want to set some ground rules and a bit of a safety message to say that mental health can be difficult to talk about. We all have a relationship with mental health because we all have mental health. And sometimes that means we've got close personal experiences or difficult experiences that we've gone through or we're currently going through that may make today's session quite tricky. It's okay not to be okay. It's okay to find this topic tricky to talk about. But let's do it as gently as possible. We've only got an hour today, so it's not going to cover in-depth topics, and it's not going to cover subjects such as suicide or depression or anxiety because of the nature of this kind of short session. But I wanted to kind of say those words because the more we talk about these topics, the more we need to talk about the difficult things to talk about. And the more we talk about it, the better we can be as a society. And please also respect and share. Be respectful in your sharing during the session today. Be mindful of what your own opinions are, and it's okay to disagree. We represent a massive cross section of our global movement, and that's a wonderful thing. So please be really mindful of that as we go through today's content. So what we're going to start off with is just a very broad starting point of what is mental health. And if you've got any ideas or want to make a contribution to this particular point, I'd love to see what your thoughts are in the chat. And the definition I use very often actually is from the World Health Organization. And it's mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to her or his community. Now, I don't know about you, but does that sound a little bit scouty as a definition? If you know what I mean, maybe just type it in the chat bar. But to me, it sounds a bit scouty. Being able to cope, being able to make a contribution to their community, realising potential, working productively and fruitfully. These are words that if we plucked them out and put them in an information brief about scouting, we'd probably agree that they didn't look out of place. And that's because scouting has always been about mental health in some ways. Scouting has always made a contribution to the mental health of both the volunteers and the young people. This is nothing new. But I would challenge you to say, actually, are we talking about this as a topic? Some are, some aren't. If we don't talk about it though, we run the risk that we are omitting a huge part of our potential to do good in the world, but also we can also get into a position where we're neglecting to look after the people that we really work hard to support. Mental health is about how we think. So that's about cognitions and processes and the way we interpret what's going on around us. It's about how we feel, often associated with heart. It's a bit of a brain and a whole body thing in reality. But the idea is that it's about how we think, how we feel, happy, sad, anger, frustrated, disgust, jealousy, fear, all core emotions that we experience very regularly. And it's a natural part of human experience to experience all those different emotions. Sometimes all at the same time in a real mess that are really tricky to work out what's going on for us. And that's perfectly natural and totally a normal part of our lived experience as humans. It's about also what we do and how we behave, how we put ourselves across. So it's inherently linked to scouting because scouting influences the way we see the world. Imagine a scout, 14 years old, going on a jamboree for the first time. They go away for 2 weeks and they meet hundreds of scouts from all over the world. They get to do things they'd never done before. Imagine how that changes the way they interpret the world, the way they see themselves, and the way they talk and the way they communicate, and the confidence it gives them. Scouting has always been about mental health. Importantly, just like physical health, we all have mental health. But unfortunately, for many reasons, society, the law, our cultures have made mental health difficult to talk about when it's the most natural and typical part of our human being. So just like physical health, we all have mental health. And if we want to be able to talk about mental health, we need to start talking about health, because health involves physical, mental, and social. Without mental, we're not purely talking about health. We're not talking about the whole complexity of health. Thinking a little bit about mental health and Scout volunteering, we're going to release a poll now to just see what people's thoughts are on this. So do you think being a Scout volunteer is good for your mental health? So we're going to release the poll. There's also some stats that you might find interesting underneath. Don't let that influence your judgment, because we maybe don't research the potential on this very well. So there should be a poll question in front now. So have a think. What do you reckon? So a few more people left to vote. Maybe one more. If not, we will close it very quickly. Okay, so you should now see on the screen in front of you a poll result. And what we've said is, 5 people have said yes, Scout volunteering is good for your mental health. And then one person said sometimes, but not always. And perhaps the question is too black and white. It's too narrow to really get the detail here. But it's really obvious to recognise there are some benefits to volunteering. There are a huge amount of benefits. And there's actually a lot of research to support volunteering as a beneficial thing for your mental health and physical health. And we know that Scouts are less likely to have a mood disorder in their lifetime. We know that Scouts can be seen as more resilient and have a better sense of belongingness. So they feel like they belong. And that is a really massive underpinning to somebody's mental health. If they feel like they belong as part of a group or part of a system, and they feel like they can make a contribution, we know that that is a huge factor in our own mental health as adults and also young people, of course. However, the question is, how often do we talk about the pros and cons of volunteering? We perhaps talk more about the benefits to volunteering, but actually, do we need to be real with ourselves and truthful with ourselves and talk about the detrimental effects or the negative effects of volunteering, the stress and the pressure it can put on people? Because like mental health, like depression, like suicide, sometimes there's a myth that if we talk about it, it'll make it worse. And that's never the case for anything. If we talk about it, if we're honest with ourselves, if we put it out in the open, we can understand it more and we can do something about it. If we ignore it, it gets bigger and bigger without us paying any attention. So the problem around volunteer mental health and the negative effects will get bigger if we ignore it. I use this analogy, and if you've ever done any training with me online or in person, you'll probably recognize this. And it's about stress. It's called a stress bucket or stress container. It comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's a very commonly used tool. The idea is that we all have a capacity to deal with what life throws at us, what life events, stresses, difficulties, adversities, whatever it throws at us. It's our capacity to deal with those things. And gradually, generally, over our lifetime, our bucket, in this analogy, gets bigger. Our capacity, our ability to deal with things gradually grows. What happens is life events, difficulties, changes, transitions, all go in this bucket, and it fills up and fills up. And we need some stress in there. Some stress keeps us motivated, it keeps us focused, it keeps us energetic. If we had no stress, we'd be very bored. But what happens is it fills up and up and up. And if we don't get to release that in some way, it can overflow. And if it overflows, or if it's constantly at the top, it can become draining and really damaging to our health. Recognizing what signs you give off when your bucket's full or overflowing is a really important part of self-awareness. Knowing what are my signs that I'm running low on energy and I'm really struggling. Luckily, what we have is ways of coping. And in this analogy, think about it in the sense of like taps that are releasing that stress and that strain on us. Stress comes in and the coping skills and activities allow that stress to be released. These coping skills or activities, if you've got any idea of what they might be, put them in the chat. But these are things such as talking to friends and family. It could be a hobby, an interest. It could be looking after yourself. It could be having some good food that you enjoy. It could be playing sport. Importantly, it should involve sharing the difficulties that you're going through, as well as doing some stuff as well that's maybe removed from those difficulties. But it can be absolutely anything. Volunteering for Scouts, I think we can all recognise how that's beneficial to us and how that could be a coping skill and how that could be something that relieves stress from us. But equally, the stressful things as well can also be stuff that goes in the stress container. Things that go in the stress container could also be quite positive life events. If you think about the event of moving house to somewhere you want to go to, somewhere you want to live, that's an incredibly stressful event that would go inside your container. The coping, so scouting then could be a stressful event. It could be something that fills up your stress container. And at the same time, it could be something that helps you release that. And this is completely subjective and up to your, two people could do the same activity. One person could find it stressful. One person could find it really relieving. So I'd encourage you as a volunteer to draw this out and map this out. What's going on for me? What's my stress bucket look like? And the questions we can ask ourselves could be, what's in my container? What can I change? What can't I change and I need to accept? What can I do to help myself right now? And who can I ask for help if I can't do it myself? Trying to understand the responses to that question can be really informative about how you're running your own life and thinking about how you can order and reorder things and reprioritize. I mean, as you said on the chat there, doing exercise, watching something, discuss with somebody, very good. Jonathan says, do something you like. Yeah, absolutely. And the key there, Jonathan, is the fact that it's about doing something that you like. It's not about doing something that other people think you would like. It's about making sure that you do activities that are meaningful and helpful to you as a way of coping. And you really need to work out what it is that you like to do that. Sometimes people will tell you what you should be doing, and actually very rarely is that the same thing that you like is what they like. So taking the time to understand that's really key. Okay, so one of the things, we're going to split this into 3 areas. The first, we're going to look at what we can do for ourselves. The second is what we can do for other people to support our peers or fellow scouts. And the third thing is we're going to look at what we can do as organisations. And then once I've explained a few things, a few ideas, what we'll do is we'll split into discussion groups to talk about what we could do next. Raoul, can we release the second poll? So there's a poll here and it says, as part of leader training, do you get to talk about mental health? Let's see what you think. So it's a bit of a mixed result there. We've got a mix of 3 different responses there. So yes, a good amount, yes but limited, and no. One of the questions we can take back to our organisations after this call is, what are we talking about mental health? When do we need to talk about mental health in our leader training? When we train leaders, what opportunities are there to talk about managing and coping with the extra workload you're taking on? Thinking about a few ideas here for what we can do. One of the things we can really consider is the balance that we have to do between maybe work life and home life, or caring duties, and holding on to scouting at the same time. We all know that it can put pressure on us to be a volunteer for Scouts, but how often do we actually think about it? Being aware of your own mental health and physical health can be really key to improving your own health. We need to understand it first. Really importantly, when you're struggling, or maybe when scouting has filled up a bit of your stress container or your stress bucket, really ask yourself the question, why do I volunteer? What is it that why am I doing this? What's at the root of why I'm doing what I do and why I give up my time? Because when you answer that question, you can also think, right, how do I increase not the amount of time, but the percentage of time that I scout that I enjoy? So if I scout for a few hours a week, and actually I only enjoy 20% of that time, then something needs to change, because it's really not going to be productive. It's not going to be sustainable. So how do I increase the percentage of scouting that I enjoy? And there's jobs that we do as volunteers that we're not going to enjoy. And that's okay too, because to run an organisation, we've got to do some things that are less enjoyable. But if you're finding yourself doing more and more of the things that you don't enjoy, then you're going to burn out at some point. Another thing that I've seen a lot with volunteers is the inability to say no. And I've also personally fallen into this as well. But saying yes can be rewarding, and there's often really good reasons why you're saying yes. But pause, look at your stress bucket and think, what can I stop doing to make space for this? Who else can help me if I'm going to take on this duty? If I'm going to take on this role, what else can I stop doing? And another idea to think about is taking time off, like a holiday from scouting. Now, this can be helpful because do work, or even when we work for ourselves, we know the importance of giving ourselves a break, and we give ourselves either annual leave, or we give ourselves some time off and some downtime from work. And although scouting isn't work necessarily if you're a volunteer, it's still using the parts of your brain that you would use for work. It's still working hard. So taking time off and saying, put the out of office on your emails and saying, yep, I'm not going to be doing this. I'm not going to be doing scouting for a week. Somebody else is going to take on my time, or I'm not going to do scouting for a day, whatever it is. But giving yourself that break can be really key. Another last point on this one is to think about, how do I be open about my volunteering with my loved ones? It often puts pressure on personal relationships, our friends and family. So how do I be open about it? How do I be clear about why I volunteer and when I'm going to volunteer? And how do I also give them their time back as well? How do I make sure that they're doing the things that they want to be able to do? Negotiate. But if we hide it, if we don't talk about it, it becomes an underlying issue. If we talk about it, if we try and understand it together, it can become a much more helpful conversation. So next, we're going to have a little look at what we can do to support our fellow scouts. And we've got another poll here as well. So the question is, I would know what to do to support a fellow scout volunteer if they were distressed or very upset. And we've got 4 options there. Yes, I'm confident. Yes, although would be out of my comfort zone. No, although I would try. No, I wouldn't know what to do. Let's see what you think. Okay, last 20 seconds if anybody else wants to vote. We've got 5 out of 9 votes in, so got a good number, but it'd be nice to see any more. Okay, let's close it off there then. So we've got a result in, and we've got 6 results there. So one person, yes, I'm confident, I know what to do, and another 5 that say yes, although I would be out of my comfort zone. And actually, that's pretty reflective of scouting in a lot of ways. Actually, it's about, yes, we've got quite a few people in scouting that are confident and are very able to support others. But a lot of us are kind of in this place where we would give it a go, but we're not very confident, and that's okay. As a therapist myself, actually, I feel like that sometimes as well, where I'm like, yes, I know what I'm doing, but I feel out of my comfort zone, or this is difficult and I'm not sure what to do here. And that's a really typical experience when it comes to supporting others. One of the things we can try and do, though, is to think about, how can I increase my skill in being able to support others? A couple of really top tips, and we've got such a short session today that these are very, very basic level. But really take the time to support your fellow scout. You are there as a fellow scout. You're not there to solve their problems or to be a mental health professional. You're purely there to be a fellow scout. So those boundaries are really key. Start by asking how they feel. Listen. Try not to throw your opinions at them. Try not to be forceful of your own ideas. Your advice is very rarely helpful. Advice itself, purely given, is often not what somebody needs when they're upset. They often need time to be supportive and to understand what they're experiencing. And simply having somebody like yourself that's non-judgmentally, empathetically listening to them can be extremely helpful. Whatever they're saying, accept as their truth. Doesn't mean you have to agree, but recognize that that's their opinion right now. That's what they're feeling. So that's true. That their feeling is their truth. The reality may be very different, but when you're upset, often our view of reality is skewed. Try this is a phrase: a scout must whistle under all circumstances, I think. And I from BP, and I think the quote's a bit questionable at times, because actually we need to stay upbeat and we need to be proactive and resilient. But at the same time, one way of misinterpreting that might be we need to be positive at all times, and that's not helpful. Try not to turn everything into a positive. Things are really difficult and rubbish. You often hear people saying it could be worse, and that is really unhelpful a lot of the time, because of course they could be worse. Our human brains are wonderfully imaginative. We can always think about how something could be worse. But by saying, oh, it could be worse, or some people have it worse, it doesn't help the person that's upset. And it certainly doesn't help the people that we're imagining have it worse. So what might be more helpful is to say, yeah, that's really difficult. That sounds really tough. You're going through a really tough time right now. I'm really glad you've told me about it. Accept things are difficult and tricky. Accept that that person may find things difficult that you find easy. And they also might find things easy that you find difficult. A lot of the time we don't try and support others is when we're afraid to do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing. And actually, when our attitude and respect is there, and we don't force our opinions, and we really try hard to listen, we'll very rarely say the wrong thing. And if you say something that doesn't go down very well, take a step back, apologize, and say, look, I think we've misunderstood here. Let's keep trying. So loads of ideas there, and I'm sure you've got tons yourself for how we might be able to support other people. So lastly, thinking about the bigger, broader picture, as organisations, I want us to think a little bit more about what we can do. Try and answer this poll again. So the question is, as organisations, are we communicating specifically about mental health? So are your organisations talking about mental health and putting it out on social media or on a website or producing resources? Have a think. What do you reckon? Okay, so at the moment, we've got a 50-50 split. I'm not sure if there's anybody else about to answer. Okay, I think that'll do us, Raoul. So we've got the amazing thing about this is that we're saying that everybody's saying on the poll that yes, we are communicating about mental health, and that's really amazing. Roughly half are saying yes, a good amount, and the other half are saying yes, but limited or small amounts. And that's the hardest thing. Starting and making that initial step to talk about mental health is the hardest thing to do. So that's an amazing step. Let's think about the next steps, perhaps. We need to make sure that mental health is on our agenda as an organisation. It needs to be embedded in programme, so the delivery of scouting, the training of adult volunteers or young leaders, or rovers, for example. It also needs to be considered as part of Safe from Harm and also adult support. I was a listening ear at the World Scout Jamboree last summer, and a key part of Safe from Harm was being able to support people with any mental health needs that they had. We need scouting to communicate clearly, deliberately and proactively about mental health. When it comes to mental health and preventing distress or preventing suicide, for example, which is one of the Sustainable Development Goals, then the more we talk about it clearly, deliberately and proactively, the more we can prevent suicide and the more we can increase awareness around mental health. We need scouting to be a place safe from harm. And if we don't train our leaders to recognise mental health difficulties or people in distress or what to do about that, then we may be not looking after our young people or adult volunteers as well as we could. We need to talk about the positives also that scouting can bring for mental health. And actually we could actually recruit people based on a desire to improve their mental health. People might go, hey, I want to volunteer because I know it's going to be beneficial to get outside and do some fun activities and educate young people with skills. And a key thing we can also do, especially if we maybe don't have internal people that have got knowledge around mental health, is to create partnerships with local mental health organisations or national mental health organisations, because they are just as passionate about mental health as you are about scouting. So together, we can create a better world. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakout rooms for about 3 people, about 3 or 4 in each. And I'm going to ask you to consider talking about one or both of these questions. You're going to have just under 15 minutes to do it. So you've got a bit of time, especially if it's only a small amount. But I'd like you to discuss, what can I do as an individual to support my own mental health, or the mental health of volunteers at a local or team level. So within my team, what can I do for me and for them? Or think about the bigger picture and think about, as organisations, what can we do to increase awareness of mental health and support to volunteers? So we're going to break out into rooms now, and we'll give you a 60-second warning when you're coming back, but it'll be just before 1:45. Okay, hello everybody. It would be good to get a little bit of feedback for how things were and what you discussed. I don't know if there's somebody from each group that would like to just give us a little bit of feedback on discussions. That'd be really helpful.
There's still people that hasn't come back. There's the 60 grace seconds to close the the conversation now.
Okay. I thought people would just run away. That makes more sense. So it'd be nice, folks, to just hear a little bit of feedback from anybody about the discussions you had or any points that you thought of. I don't know if somebody wants to wave, stick their hand up and go first. That'd be great. Go on, Amir.
Thank you. We had a discussion around, let's split it between, if I just do the personal and colleagues one to start with, organization will probably have afterwards. Personal level, sort of understanding what's needed. The sort of COVID situation is like Zoom calls and Zoomed out or Teams out, and being able to take some time out for physical exercise and having breaks and things like that is probably what's needed. Different people have set up different things. So there's either formal check-ins from the with your teams where you're talking about the work, but then also informal sessions where you don't talk about work and you just talk about how people are feeling and identifying any sort of discussion points where you just chat or see how people are doing in that sort of sense. And again, in Africa, there's a session for where you used to have lunches or share lunches together, discuss what are the benefits of scouting for ourselves, for volunteers, and for the young people. To just keep checking in on that and have a reflective period as well. Another observation was around understanding the global nature of the work and the support in different time zones. And I think we had sort of 9:50 in the UK, 4:05 in the Philippines, and around 12 in Africa. This is what we had. So it's just sort of understanding that. But a share, which we've shared it's on one of our blogs in the UK, was about everyone's journey is different. And we need to understand everybody's journey and circumstances, particularly from a health perspective, from a safety perspective. Some people are flat out working, either on key workers, either supporting the logistics and the infrastructure, the food supply chains, or in the NHS, in the medical field, or people are furloughed, or people have lost their job, or business or incomes. So depending, we just need to ask and be understanding is probably the key. But team-wise, I'll probably from a work perspective add a bit more breaks in, and normally when you meet, you have a coffee, tea, and offline chat. But we just go straight into the meeting. So maybe we try and finish 5-10 minutes early to allow people to have a break and everything. But we probably need this is the equivalent of you're standing around the coffee, tea table. Now let's start the meeting type thing. So yeah.
Yeah, wow, really good overview there, Amir, of all the different ideas your group have had. That sounds brilliant, and I really like the idea of really being clear about doing check-ins with people and checking in with how people actually are. there's a little phrase about asking twice that I find helpful, and it's about the first time you ask, it's just an acknowledgement that you're there. It's not really a hello properly, and then if you ask hello, how are you, and they go, yeah, fine. Ask again, how are you? Asking twice is really key to show that meaning of, actually, I want to know how you are. Let's really talk about this. Has anybody else got anything else to add from any of the other groups at all? Somebody want to come on mic? If you unmute yourself, then you'll be able to speak.
Brian, you can speak.
A good. How are you guys? I hope you're well. Now, from our group, we looked at it in two ways. We looked at it in a personal point of view first, and then the NSO point of view. Now, I'll just go through them quite fast. We first thought that, it is important that we understand our own personal mental issues before we can now address someone else's, or we can help someone else. Yeah. So first we need to help ourselves before we can help any other person. Then we also need to get information on mental health from different sources, so that even if someone tells you that they are struggling, then you can easily understand what exactly their struggle looks like. Then there was also an aspect of standing as a role model and showing your vulnerability. Now, this comes in when, in case you are having an issue, then be the first one, especially as leaders, to say, I would like some help. I would like someone to speak to. And this boils down to other people who you are leading, either as young adults or even adults in leadership. And then we also looked at it from a perspective of the NSO. Now, the biggest challenge is creation of awareness. And so we thought our NSOs need to lead in creating awareness on mental health, because the issues there are a variety of issues. They range from suicidal thoughts all through to depression. So we need to understand what those are, and the NSOs need at least to lead in that. Then there is creation of a safe space to talk about mental health issues. We also thought that we could embed mental health issues into our programs, a bit of our programs, to have an aspect of mental health issues, and maybe even go as far as having support groups within the NSOs or our various regions, at least to help people with their mental issues, or where they can easily discuss their mental issues, especially with professionals within the associations. Yeah, thank you.
Wow, there's so many brilliant points there, Brian, and whoever was in Brian's group. Thank you. I think that Amia's already pointed out on the chat, and I picked up on it as well, as a brilliant phrase there. You said, stand as a role model and show your vulnerability. And I think that's absolutely key. I know I didn't actually introduce myself earlier properly, and I was speaking to Raoul about this when you're in the breakout room. But one of the things I often talk about with people is the fact that as a volunteer in scouting, I have experienced burnout, and I've experienced depression, not necessarily because of scouting, but because of everything else that was going on in my life and various experiences. And being able to show vulnerability is a really difficult thing when you're a volunteer in scouting that's normally quite proactive and positive and supporting others. To be able to lower that shield and say, I'm actually struggling, is a really difficult thing to do, and something I wasn't able to do at the time. So I think that phrase really resonated with me, really importantly. The other thing to say there is, well, you've got so many good phrases. Creation of awareness in scouting, absolutely key. And so are safe spaces as well, being able to safe space to express yourself and show that vulnerability when you've got that shared kind of respect. And hopefully we did that a little bit at the start of this call with that kind of slide on before we begin. Whenever you start a conversation about mental health, I'd always start with a group agreement, some sort of contract to say, this is how we're going to conduct ourselves today. Let's try and keep within these boundaries. I think that's absolutely key. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that, Brian. I've got time for one more person if they briefly want to feedback. I think it was 3 groups. So if there's one more person at all.
Can I go? Can I say something?
Who's that? Go for it.
Yes, Cynthia. You can.
Cynthia.
Yeah. I'm a medical doctor, and I'm from Lebanon. I'm scout from Lebanon. I study psychotherapy, and I've been dealing with patients with COVID-19. So I really know how these patients were really depressed. Their mental health was really I can't say how much they were really depressed. They were really down. They just wanted someone to lift them up. So, but not only for patients with COVID-19, but also it affected their families also. We had many scout groups who were affected with COVID-19, and they were really there is a region in Lebanon, it's called Sharre, and there we had like some number of scouts who had COVID-19, and they really needed support, because when you are affected with this virus, like everyone feel like you are they're afraid to see you, they're afraid to meet you, even if you don't have any symptoms, but just you are positive. So by supporting those patients, by supporting those people, we were able to really win this war, and kind of in Lebanon. And people now post COVID-19, we can say post COVID-19 because the cases are decreasing here. So post COVID-19 they don't know how to act. They don't know if they can meet each other or not, if they can do any activities or not. So it's really hard. So I think that mental issues is something. It's a great point to tackle, and we should do more activities about this.
Thank you, Cynthia. That was amazing to hear about your experiences working as a doctor and training in psychotherapy. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you also for the work you're doing, and anybody else that's on this webinar are doing to support people that are currently going through COVID-19 or the effects of it. So thank you for that. Lots of really insightful points there. And yeah, absolutely, we need to talk about this more. We need to do more work on it. And actually, it's a really scouting topic. Yeah, whenever you talk to young people, this is one of the topics that they want to talk about more. It's one of the topics that's on a lot of people's minds right now. And actually, it's going to be very relevant after the pandemic, after the current kind of scenario is played out. It's still going to be a relevant topic, and the after effects are actually going to be stronger. As a therapist, I know that the people I'm working with currently, it's not now that's the issue. It's going back to normality, going back to things opening up again and things becoming more active is going to be a bigger step in terms of anxiety. So, I think that's something we've also got to realize, that when maybe things start to ease and things get more manageable in terms of locking down or in terms of freedom of movement, etc., there's still going to be some big repercussions of this. So just to bring us to a close then, it's been really interesting to hear about all your different perspectives and different ideas, really fascinating and really good reflections. To summarize, I'd say that we all have mental health, young people and volunteers included. This is something that we all have, and it's a totally natural human part of our existence. To be human is to have mental health, and to be human is to be distressed at times. It's all about adversity, and so is our scouting story. It's about survival, it's about coping, it's about managing. So let's talk about it. So our mental health, we'll probably all agree, mostly for the better, but it also influences us for the worse as well. We have times when scouting causes us a lot of stress, and even some of the nice positive changes or events in our life can also be stressful. As scouts, we need to talk about mental health. If we're not talking about it, we're potentially neglecting people's education and also safe from harm. So let's put it on the agenda. Even if you're not sure where to start, simply saying, I think we need to talk more about this. Have that sense of vulnerability that Brian mentioned earlier. Say, hey, I'm not an expert in this, but I'm unsure how to start this conversation up, but I'd like to start. That is an amazing thing. There's also lots of videos and resources online that you can use. And the good thing about that is you can say, hey, I've got this thing, let's have a look at it. Let's talk about it. You don't have to express your own ideas. You can say, hey, here's some ideas. Let's talk about this thing rather than let's talk about my opinions on it. It's a lot easier to do that as a starting point. So as organisations, we all have a duty to safeguard the young people and also support our volunteers too. Scouting is a wonderful movement, but we also need to be able to support people through their experiences. So my question to you is, there's been 14 or so people on this call today. If we all go and have one conversation after today, we can double the amount of people that have talked about mental health. And that would be a really wonderful thing to be able to do. If every single one of us can go away and say, hey, let's have a chat about mental health. Or, hey, I was on this call earlier, it was about mental health. I had these ideas, what do you think? Because that starts a ripple, that starts a movement to talk more about mental health and scouting. So what I'd like to be able to do is if you can comment in the chat or write down privately is absolutely fine, any ideas you've got for what you would like to do following this call. It could be a really small action. It could be I'm going to just simply have that one conversation, or it could be to start a project, or it could be to get a movement going. It could be to talk to your cubs or your rovers about mental health. Whatever it is, have a think. What would you do? One action. In terms of the video, we have been recording this. We're going to tidy it up and then we're going to put it on an online space. I've also, if you look, you might have to move the chat bar. There you go. But my my Twitter, Instagram, etc. is on there on the app. Feel free to watch out, to reach out. I'd love to be able to network with fellow people that are interested in this topic. And also I have an email there that you can email if you've got any questions or any ideas following this presentation. But now might be a good time if anybody's got any questions or comments, either on the mic or on the chat. I appreciate, I've run out of my time allocation, but I'm more than happy to stay on for a few more minutes to discuss. But feel free to leave if you've also got other places to go.
What WASM tools and resources are available on mental health?
That's a very good question. I think the work at the moment has been mainly around safe from harm and around mental health, safe from harm. There's been a lot of work completed for the jamborees and for major events around mental health. For example, last year we produced quite a lot of resource around listening ear development and making sure that people had access to those sorts of tools. But I think it's coming as well in terms of the sort of more general mental health awareness side of things. And one of the best things people can do is share the actual online tools and resources that other organizations have made. We don't, as organizations, we certainly don't have to be experts in this. By sharing videos and resources from charities, international charities, is one of the best things we can do. A resource that I'd certainly share is, I've typed it there, the name, so people can understand what I'm saying. But the organization Action for Happiness have a tool called the Great Dream. The Great Dream model. And this is a really good way of, for me, capturing what scouting does to improve mental health. And it's 10 things you can do to improve your mental health, essentially. And it breaks down what those 10 things are. But that's a good way of kind of capturing what scouting does for me. And it's in a really gentle way. It's not specifically about mental health, but it certainly is in some ways. Any other questions or comments? Happy to hear Anybody else's thoughts or questions?
Okay, if there is no more questions for Jay, we will conclude this webinar, this session today. Just a quick reminder that next week, both on Friday at 8 p.m. Central European Summer Time, so 7 p.m. UK time, will be another session about communicating mental health with scouts and parents, and also the same one repeated on Saturday at 10 p.m. Central European Summer Time, so 9 p.m. GMT, 7 p.m. KL time, if I'm not mistaken. So stay tuned and spread the word. As we said, the recording will be available soon in the WASM Services platform under the Youth Program Service, sub-area members, health and well-being.
Great. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.